So lesson 6 here, this is the quadratic formula. You're going to see it on your formula sheet. We'll develop it on the next page maybe. It's a pretty hard proof, so we'll probably just skip it. But what it does is it finds those roots for you. So on the quiz, very last question, you were asked to find the x-intercepts using completing the square, right? So the quad formula is a formula that you can use that does the exact same thing without really much work at all. Okay, so it's a nice little shortcut for finding roots. But in general, remember, you should be able to find roots by also factoring. Do you remember the zero product rule from last unit? So quickly, let's use inspection to factor this and solve for the roots. What's the magic numbers here? To make 18, it's 9 and 2. And then which one's negative? To make the positive 7. Positive 2 and a negative 9? No, positive 9 and a negative 2. So then how would you solve that? Use the zero product rule. It's the opposite of those binomials. The two roots are negative 9 and positive 2. So this is just trying to remind you that to find their roots, which are also the x-intercepts, which are also the zeros, however vocabulary term they want to use, you can use factoring. If you can't factor it, then I recommend you use the quad formula. Okay? All right, next one. Using decomp. So this is a quick review. 6 times 12 is 72? Which factors of 72 get you to negative 1? So it's a negative 72. Which factors are off by only 1? 9 and 8. Which one's negative? The 9. Okay, so break down that middle term. So minus 9x plus a 8x minus a 12. And then this is just a review from last unit, which you guys showed me that you can do this pretty well. And I was very happy when I was marking those tests. You know, sometimes teachers always tell you when they're angry or when they're upset, but to be honest, I was very pleased over the weekend marking that. So I just wanted to share that with you. And taking out a 3x, we get a 2x minus 3. And we're going to take out a 4 and get 2x minus 3. Now that they have the 2x minus 3 in common, factor that out, and you're left with 3x plus 4. And all this, we said, is all equal to 0. That's what we were saying. So how to solve using the zero product law. Do you remember how to do these? What's the trick? Forget that the 2 is there. Forget that the 2 is there. What would it be? And then divide out the 2. So you get 3 halves. And then the other one, imagine the 3 is not there, so it would be negative 4. And then divide out the 3. Good. So these are the two roots. These are the two roots. Now, heaven forbid you can't factor something, like in the bottom here. So is it possible to solve this quadratic equation? Well, what's the AC value? 10. What factors of 10 are going to give you negative 8? 1 and 10, no. 2 and 5, no. So this can't be factored, and so we need an alternative method. Okay, so if it can't be factored, use quad formula. It is the secret formula. Now on the next page, what we can do, if you're interested, is we could develop the quadratic formula using complete the square. But I think it would be like all this. So we can do it with numbers. So this is the second way. So the first way was using factoring to find roots. The second way is use completing the square. And that's what I'm going to show you on class example 1. And then the third way will be the formula. So you have 3, and then there's even a fourth way. You can use your calculator technology. But on the unit test, they won't let you use technology on the written response. So just a reminder of completing the square. So one more review of completing the square. If the a value is not 1, we will take it out of the first two only. Any questions on that? If the a value is not 1 for completing the square, you're going to factor it out of the first two terms only. Now we go inside that bracket, and what are we going to do with that 4? Divide it by 2, and then what? So 4 divided by 2, square. Okay, so we're going to add 4 and subtract 4. Those 3 make up the perfect square. What was it? How do you know it's 2? Whoops. How do you know it's 2? What's this number? Always. It's always the middle term cut in half. Always. Okay. Now, you still have that plus 5 out there, but you got to do that thing where you see your date. Whoops, circled the wrong one. This guy wants to leave the party, but you got to talk to your date before you get out of there. Okay? So that positive 2 and that minus 4 combine for a minus 8. And then we clean it up. 5 minus 8. Okay? And all this we're saying is equal to 0. So how to solve this now? Isolate the brackets. So we got to move the 3 over, right? And then divide by 2. Then we square root this thing. And then we have it. Okay, so that was the example that we couldn't factor on the previous page. So if you can't factor it, you can also use completing the square. 99% of the kids I've met in 20-1 don't use this method, even though it's very powerful. Most people just jump to the quad formula, which is okay. Okay, so do you want to complete the square on random variables like this? If you're interested in that, we could do it together once I sit down. We can do it together. But this is almost like an exercise in futility. It will just, you guys will be like, oh my god, boring. Okay? So, because in that example that I just crossed out, we would develop this formula. Okay? Otherwise, you just take it for granted. Okay? And I think that's what we're going to do. We're just going to take it for granted. Okay, so where do these letters come from? It has to be, to use this formula, the equation must be in expanded form. And in this book, they've been calling it like general or standard, I can't remember. But it's the completely expanded form, this one here, that you're used to from factoring. It has to be in that expanded form, where a is the coefficient on the x squared term, b is the coefficient on x, and c is the constant. And then you have this magical formula, okay, which you can develop using completing the square. And if you really want a challenge, try that on your own. It's not that easy. Okay, so you'll notice that A and B, are they in that nice form? But what about C? So you have to do a little bit of work on C to get it in this form. Okay, and then you're going to take the negative of the B value plus or minus the square root of all this. And this thing inside the radical, we're gonna do a whole lesson just on what's inside that radical. And that's tomorrow. And then divide by 2a. So at first, when you're first getting used to this, I would recommend that you just jot down the variables. A is 1 in this example, B is 2, and C is -1. I would recommend that just at the beginning. Just so you don't get like messed up or confused about the negatives. Okay, so let's get this done. The formula says negative b, so negative 2. You guys okay on that? Plus or minus. Now we got to jump into this called the discriminant, this thing in there. So what's b squared? Do you want me to write 2 squared or am I going to write 4? Okay, 2 squared minus 4. A is 1 and C is -1. That all stays in the radical house. This is all divided by 2a, which is 2 times 1. Okay, so if you typed in everything inside the radical, I'm sure it would work out fine. Just make sure you use your brackets properly. I'm going to do them by hand because sometimes people mess up the calculator, even though it is very possible to do everything with the calculator. I'll highlight it for you. Everything under the radical, I would try to just do it in the calculator separately without any radical signs. Okay, figure out what is underneath that radical. So what do you guys get? Someone said 8. Is it 8? Because 2 squared is 4, and then you have a double negative in there. Do you see the double negative? And that'll be 2 negatives making a plus, and 4 times 1 times 1 is 4. All over 2. Okay, so I'm just going to write a little bit neater now. We got -2 plus or minus √8 all over 2. This step right here is very necessary to get to. Do not just jump right to the hundredths. Don't just type everything in the calculator right away. Because in order for you to accomplish your full marks on the test, you have to take this thing here and simplify it into what's called the exact value. Okay, right now it's in the exact value. It's just not in lowest terms. So what can we do with that radical? 8 is the same as inside the radical. 8 is 4 times 2, so the 4 will come out as a 2. So that's how the √8 simplified. Okay. Alright, now what we have to do is we have to take all these coefficients right here, here, and here, and scale it down. It's like reducing a fraction. So it's like 2 divided by 2 is 1. So this becomes -1 plus or minus √2 over 1. Do we need to write it over 1? So this is it. So x1 equals -1 plus √2, and x2 equals -1 minus √2. Okay, and then you could go to the nearest hundredth usually. Even though the book's saying tenth, go to the nearest hundredth. So -1 plus √2. Got like 0.414. Whatever, I went to the thousandth. -1 minus √2. negative 2.414. Okay, let's go to the second one, and then I'll erase everything, and we'll do the third one. Okay, again, establish the variables just to make sure you're on track. A is 4, B is negative 12, and C is 3. Okay, let's use the formula up above. Negative B. So right now, B is negative 12. So if you do the negative of that, you get positive 12 plus or minus. Now we got to do the radical. What's B squared? That's negative 12 squared. And notice I put a bracket around that, especially if you need your calculator. If you're a person that, and you can self-admit this, everyone knows who they are. If you need calculator to do 12 squared, that's fine. You make sure you put a bracket around here. So it will become positive 144. Because if you don't put that bracket, you're screwed. Okay, and then we got to go minus 4. A is 4, and C is 3. All over 2A, which is like this. Okay, let's clean this up. 12 plus or minus the square root of, we got 144 minus 16 times 3, or 12 times 4, 12 times 4, oh my god, 48. All over 8. So you get 12 plus or minus 96 all over 8. Is 96 a perfect square? It's not, right? So what perfect square factors 96? 16? 16 times 6. Okay. So then we have 12 plus or minus, let's just go like this, 16 and 6. The 16 will come out as a, okay, 4 root 6 all over 8. Now you're talking about lowest terms on the coefficients only. It's just like a lowest terms fraction, like 2/4 is a half. So lowest terms on those coefficients. So what does 12, 4, and 8 all divide by? 4. So we can divide all those by 4. And you get 3 plus or minus root 6 over 2. Now how to get that in the calculator? This is an example of like invisible brackets, especially for those kind of just learning. Okay, so that 3 plus root 6, 3 plus root 6, get that value first and then divide. What was in the bottom? A 2? Okay. And then do 3 minus root 6. And then divide that by 2. So we're looking for 2.72 and 0.275. Okay, so get the decimals for those. And the last one. And I'll have to erase all this stuff. Okay, working on C now. In order to use the quad formula, what does it have to be? Ax squared, bx, and c, right? So let's make that happen. Bring that 3 in, you get 12x plus 15. What side should I bring them to, the left or the right? To the left so that the lead coefficient is positive, right? Okay. And even using color, you can see that the A is 4. The B is minus 12. And the C is minus 15. Now using the formula at the top of your screen, we got to go negative B value. So it's going to become positive 12 again, plus or minus the square root of, okay, B squared is negative 12 again, minus 4. A is 4 and C is negative 15. All over 2 times 4. Okay, so we have some similarities. 144 again. And do you see the minus minus there in the radical? So minus minus, you can automatically go plus. And then what's 4 times 15 is 60. 60 times 4 is 120. No, 240. Double that. 240. 6 times 4, yeah. And then all over 8. So 12 plus or minus. I bet some of you are kind of already skipping this step where you just get the number. How many are doing that? That's okay. Just make sure you type everything in perfectly. You get 388. Oh, sorry. 384 all over 8. So now we're looking for perfect square factors of 384. So where do you start? Divide it by 4. 4 worked. And what'd you get? 96. Didn't we already do 96? So 16. So 16 and 4. What's 16 times 4? 64. So I bet the perfect square in here is 64. Perfect square, 64. That's your perfect square factor. That will divide it. This is confusing you, isn't it? 384 is 64 times 6. So that 64 comes out as a 8. Good. All over 8. Now we have to do that game where we do lowest terms on the coefficients only. What does 12 and 8 both divide by? 4. So then you get 3 plus or minus 2 root 6 all over all over 2. And then even like this form, you could still mess with this form further. Because you could think of it like the first term gets divided by 2 and the last term gets divided by 2. So you could go like this. 3 halves plus or minus just root 6. So that's another way you could write it. You know, just in case on the multiple choice you're seeing stuff you hadn't seen before, you can take both those terms in the numerator and divide by the 2. Okay. So putting this in the decimal, we got 1.5 plus root 6, 3.949. And the other one would be 1.5 minus root 6. So I got negative 0.949. Okay, so for this last class example, I think it's the last one, it says find the zeros. So which way do you want to go? Can we factor this? What's the AC value? Negative 3? What factors of negative 3 are there? Only 1 and 3, right? They'd have to both be negative. No, they'd have to both be positive. So you can't factor it. Everybody see that? So it can't be factored. So what's your choice? Do I do quad formula or do I complete the square? Look how nasty complete the square would be. Let me just get you started. Take out a negative 3, you get x squared minus 4/3 x. Then you'd have to cut that in half. You'd get 4/6, and then square that. Yeah, 4/6 would become, you have to reduce that to 2/3, and then it would be 4/9. So you add 4/9 minus 4/9. You want to do any of that? Nasty, I think. So even complete the square looks nasty. So in general, probably what's the best way to go about doing this stuff? Okay, so quad formula. Just going to jot it down one last time. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And this will solve for x values. Okay? So what's our b value? B is 4, so we're going to go negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 4 times, what's a? Negative 3. And what's c? 1. All over 2 times a, so 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Okay, so negative 4 plus minus. What's inside that house there? 16 plus 12. See the double negative? All over negative 6. And we got, what's 16 plus 12? 28. So negative 4 plus or minus square root of 28 over negative 6. Does 28 have perfect square factor? 4 and 7. 4 comes out as a 2. So negative 4 plus or minus 2 root 7 all over negative 6. Now we do the game where we lowest terms it. So 4, 2, and 6 all divide by 2. So we get negative 2 plus or minus 1 root 7 all over negative 3. Alright, get the 2 to the nearest hundredth or thousandth, whatever you want. Negative 2 plus root 7. Then I'm going to hit enter, and now I'll divide by negative 3. So negative 0.215. Now just repeat that process, but use negative instead of positive. I've got 1.549 after rounding. Okay, double check that you can also get those decimals with your calculator. Okay, please double check that you can get those. Okay, homework is short, so do it all. What? Test marks are at the back.